Carolina Museum of History is the agency of the state's Department of Cultural Resources charged with preserving and interpreting the heritage of the entire state. In a typical year, the museum's Raleigh home serves more than 160,000 people of all ages from across the state and the nation.
This is one of the major problems the museum faces. At the height of the school group visitation period, it is simply too crowded. You cannot get children around each other, and nor can they see anything.
John Ellington is the administrator of the North Carolina Museum of History.
Well, space problems in a museum are not new, and space problems certainly in this museum are not new. The museum has faced a lack of space and lack of adequate exhibition space from its very beginnings. It originally was just a hall in the Natural History Museum. It became an independent museum in 1902, and even then was much too small. We have been in 4 homes. Prior to this, we were in the old education building, and again, space was a problem. We moved in this building in 1968. We thought it would solve the problems. It didn't. We've grown, and it's a problem again. Specifically, space creates problems for us in such areas as just getting traffic through the museum, one group around another, in how our ability to show our collection. Not only can't we store it properly, we really can't show enough of it. We don't have the classroom space to adequately hold children for our special programs. We really lack sufficient space to cover areas, big areas of the state's history, which we simply do not do now. Space, or the lack of space, is one of the major things that affects a visitor to the museum. Throughout the museum, the visitor is presented with problems due to a lack of space, but in particular, he is presented with problems in the chronology section of the museum, whereby we have areas that really do create severe bottlenecks. A good example is the Indian section. Here we have what is in effect a longhouse that was recreated to show a couple of things about the way Indians built their homes. But unfortunately, it is a very narrow passageway, and when people come in and they want to see the Indian material, they stop, and therefore you back up traffic, especially if we're dealing with school groups or a large group of adults. Another major section that really is a bottleneck is the Revolutionary War section of the museum. And as you can see, it's very narrow. These arrows and the information here tend to stop people. It's also one of the more interesting exhibits in the museum. And unfortunately, most of the bottlenecks occur where it is most interesting, because we've done a lot of exhibit flair. The other problem we have in the lack of space is the inability to put in audiovisuals. There's no music, there are no tapes, there are no video, because again, it stops traffic, and we cannot get people by. I think this exhibit exemplifies one of the major problems the museum has, and that is the lack of space to adequately cover an historical subject. The Lost Colony is basically reduced to a poster. At least we're able to cover it. In many instances, we can't even illustrate the subject. For instance, in the museum, there is nothing on agriculture, nothing on women to speak of. There's almost nothing on industry, nothing on the furniture industry, nothing on the fishing industry. The museum is really limited, especially in its chronology, to major dates, and even then very sketchily. World War I is a case. World War II is simply a case. This inability to adequately cover historical subjects, especially in the History Museum, is a very serious fault. And that is mainly because we don't have the space to do it in. In addition to the space problems that are obvious to the visitor, there are space problems that are obvious to the staff of the museum, and that is our storage for our collections. And I think this gives some good examples. For instance, we have large objects on high shelves, which make them dangerous to get down. We have objects behind objects, which means that if you reach for one, you are in danger of knocking off the front one, which might fall on something else. Our textiles are stored in aisles instead of correctly into cabinets. We have very crowded shelves and storage units for other types of materials. This endangers the historical collection of the state of North Carolina. It is crucial that we have adequate space to store our collection in. This is the educational facility for the museum. 2 small classrooms. Approximately 20 people can get into each of these classes. The museum, one of its primary purposes, of course, is education. And many of the programs are done outside of the exhibition areas. And it is in these 2 rooms that we must conduct those types of educational programs. It severely limits our ability to do this kind of programming. For instance, last year during the height of the school group season, we had to say no to 1/3 of the requests we had for this type of programming. It is a key function of the museum, and we are severely limited. It is very important that we have additional classroom facilities. One of the major ways we have in trying to compensate for lack of space, in that we cannot show sufficient materials from the museum's collection, and we have over 350,000 items in our collection, and at best we can't show more than 10% at any one time. And also a way in which we can cover more topics about the state's history is to mount large temporary exhibitions. And this is the gallery in which we do that. This is the museum's only temporary exhibition gallery. We do 2 types. One, we borrow exhibits from other museums, but this is too small to house many of the major exhibitions. We also do exhibits ourselves. The problem with that is that, again, we lack the space to really cover the subject adequately, and we also, in doing the exhibitions, have to close this gallery approximately 6 months out of every year. This is 1/3 of the exhibit space of the museum. If we have 1/3 down during the year, then we're going to have a problem with people visiting and being able to get in this space. The other problem we have as far as the overall space of the museum goes is that there is no way to close off the museum from the rest of the area on weekends. We have corridors and bathrooms and inner hallways and lobbies that are not guarded. This is a danger to the public. So when we talk about museum space and the problems it presents, it's the inability to do exhibits, it's the inability to show our collection, and really the inability to protect the public. This is why it is so important to have the space we need.
What you're looking at is the proposed new North Carolina Museum of History. On the left, you see the old art museum space, which will be renovated for exhibit space, and a proposed new wing on the right for educational programs of the museum.
Sarah Hodgkins is Secretary of the North Carolina Department of Cultural Resources.
It's important to the state of North Carolina to have a new North Carolina Museum of History because we've only been able to show about 1/10 of our collection. And we're anxious for North Carolinians to see all of these things that tell about their history. And with this proposed new building, we will be able to show all of our collection. It will double the exhibit space that we presently have, and it will also triple the educational space for educational programs. We're also always pleased when we can set an example for adaptive reuse because we preach that and believe in that here at the Department of Cultural Resources. It also helps us to have this museum in a downtown location. Not only does it complement Raleigh's downtown revitalization, but the museum also is central to a number of other state buildings, namely the Archives and History Building, which we have to have the research from the archives in order to back up our exhibits in the North Carolina Museum of History. The North Carolina Museum of History will continue to do what it's always done, to teach the people of North Carolina about their past. But it will be better able to do it with expanded programs, educational programs, and many more exhibits of the artifacts that we own. You know, we can't tell where we're going unless we know where we've been. And I believe that the best way to teach history is through our Museum of History.
This is the old Museum of Art building here in Raleigh, which we're going to transform into the new Museum of History. I'm Vincent Lowe, chairman of the steering committee to raise $3.5 million to build the new North Carolina Museum of History building. For this investment, we can transform this solidly built, ideally located structure into a new, modern, and spacious North Carolina Museum of History for all of the citizens of North Carolina. This $3.5 million investment will enable us to move out of our present cramped quarters into this spaciousness. The museum's many collections, which cannot now be appropriately shown, will be, which will enhance the education of our school children. North Carolina has long enjoyed a strong partnership between public and private sectors in underwriting projects such as this. The need is urgent. Won't you please help us build a future for our past? Thank you.